verkiezingen gewonnen van George Bush senior.
My fellow Americans, I want to build a bridge to the 21st century that makes sure we are still the nation with the world's strongest defense, that our foreign policy still advances the values of our American community and the community of nations.
Al spoedig blijkt dat Clinton niets wil weten van de geheime diensten. De varkensbaai, de opkomst van de moslimfundamentalisten en Khomeini, de Sovjet-invasie in Afghanistan, de Iraakse bezetting van Koeweit. Al die mislukkingen hebben de naam van de CIA bezoedeld. Clinton besluit daarom alle CIA-adviseurs op het Witte Huis te ontslaan.
When he was elected, the first thing the CIA did was send 2 briefers to brief Clinton on the latest intelligence all over the world. And he sent him away from the governor's man. He said, go away, I'm not interested. He wouldn't see him. That's bad enough, but what's worse was we knew that in the CIA. So what everybody was saying, that our main client, the president, doesn't like our stuff and won't read it.
Kort na zijn aantreden benoemt Clinton de totaal onbekende James Woolsey tot directeur van de CIA.
We have to do some things differently.
I'd never had anything to do with the CIA or espionage until I went out there at the beginning of the Clinton administration. I had a meeting with President Clinton. We talked about the CIA job, but we mainly talked about what it was like to grow up in Arkansas and Oklahoma, where he grew up and I grew up.
Clinton had an ingrained fear, in a way, of the intelligence services. He grew up in the 60s. It was the time of beating up on the intelligence services. That probably gave, to his mind, a distasteful taste about the intelligence and security business.
He didn't really understand what we were doing or what kind of things we could provide for him.
There's some presidents who are much more into the sort of underworld of secret services and covert operations. I think there are a number of explanations as to why, in President Clinton's case, it may have been less. First of all, the Cold War was over. That kind of covert operation that was so much the staple of some of his predecessors was no longer there, and there had to be a whole new adaptation of the CIA and of the secret services.
His decisions and his lack of interest, his lack of support, contributed to the weakness that brought about some of the problems, sure.
If the CIA director doesn't have access to the president, he's nowhere because the CIA is under the White House.
I had only 2 meetings in 2 years. So when, in the fall of 1994, when that little Cessna airplane crashed into the south lawn of the White House staff joke was, that must be Woolsey still trying to get an appointment. And although I wasn't happy with that joke at the time, as time has gone on, I've decided it's a reasonably accurate characterization of my tenure. I did not have the president's ear, and the president was not particularly interested in intelligence.
Clinton never met, almost never met with Woolsey, did not listen to his advice, did not listen to the intelligence. He wasn't interested. He was interested in other things.
Clinton wanted to know the gossip. He wanted to know who President of France was sleeping with.
He was more interested in extramarital affairs than he was, I think, in what we were doing.
Monica Lewinsky saw Clinton more often than Jim Woolsey did.
Because Woolsey was never right. He'd come in with information, it was always wrong. Clinton stopped reading those CIA briefings. He said, I could get more out of the New York Times. Ask Woolsey about that.
I don't think I failed at all. I failed to establish a working relationship with the president. But on the other hand, if he had wanted one with me, he had many opportunities. I asked for many appointments. I think I was cordial. I was very candid.
Woolsey basically failed to be relevant. He didn't have the personality, he didn't have the character, and he didn't have the grasp of intelligence that would have allowed him to go to Clinton and say, look, there are these big disasters shaping up, and if you don't pay attention to them, your place in history will be ruined. So Woolsey was ignored because he allowed himself to be ignored.
I felt like the perpetual bringer of bad news. We say the skunk at the garden party.
Op 26 februari 1993, als Bill Clinton 1 maand president is, ontploft een bom in de ondergrondse parkeergarage van het World Trade Center van New York. 6 mensen komen om en er vallen 1000 gewonden. Nooit eerder in de geschiedenis zijn de Verenigde Staten op eigen bodem aangevallen door terroristen. De FBI zegt niet verantwoordelijk te zijn als de aanval beraamd is in het buitenland, het exclusieve werkterrein van de CIA. De CIA benadrukt weer dat ze niet mag opereren binnen de VS.
Well, it should have been taken as a warning, of course. We could have lost 15,000 Americans in that first Trade Center attack against one building. And only a misplaced charge, explosive charge, saved us.
The first World Trade Center bombing was a huge warning, and we missed it.
The war has been going on for years. We didn't recognize it. I think the first World Trade Center attack was the wake-up call. We didn't pay attention. Muslim extremists have been recruiting in Washington since the 1970s.
We were a bit naive about the determination of the groups to inflict catastrophic harm upon the American people. We could have been much more vigilant following that than we were.
After the first World Trade Center bombing, they captured an entire room of Arabic documents about bombing the World Trade Center. And they did not translate those documents. There was one man who spoke Arabic in the FBI's New York office. They didn't have the money with which to, and he didn't want to do it. He wasn't about to spend his time translating documents. He was too important for that. The second thing is they didn't have the money with which to pay for a private sector effort to translate. And the third reason is they didn't think it was important.
The FBI had the same policy for many years. They like to watch, to observe such people for a long time, because the longer they observe them, the more they find out about their operations, the more people that they can catch in the end. And so they wait and wait. And in the case of the World Trade Center in '93, they may have waited too long.
Because the FBI is ignorant. It finds a new source not credible. This, to me, is just absolutely amazing. Absolutely astonishing. And that is not to excuse the CIA, which failed to penetrate terrorism worldwide. But the FBI blew it on the World Trade Center because it is a bureaucracy and because it is a very naive, arrogant bureaucracy. It wasn't taking all of this seriously.
Dan komt de zaak Ames, die jaren van wrijving tussen de CIA en de FBI doet omslaan in een complete oorlog. Eldrick Ames, hoofd van de afdeling contraspionage van de CIA, wordt ervan beschuldigd al sinds 1985 een mol voor de Sovjet-Unie te zijn, in ruil voor $3 miljoen.
Rick Ames was a loser. He shouldn't have been in that position. He shouldn't have been given access. They should have caught him early on.
Eldridge Ames, who was known to be an incompetent case officer and an alcoholic who was way over the top in terms of drinking, and the clandestine service drinks a lot. Ames was an alcoholic within an alcoholic organization. He was put in charge of Soviet counterintelligence. A loser, an incompetent, and a drunk was put in charge of Soviet counterintelligence. Now that tells me everything I need to know about the death of the clandestine service.
De CIA doet een intern onderzoek, maar daar komt niets uit. De zaak wordt gesloten. Maar de regering Clinton is nog steeds overtuigd het grootste spionageschandaal in de Amerikaanse geschiedenis te hebben ontdekt en laat het onderzoek overdoen door de FBI. Die ontmaskert enkele maanden later Ames als spion. Een klap in het gezicht van de CIA en een daverende overwinning voor de FBI.
We were not able to find anything, and we were not cooperating particularly closely with the FBI.
They were really getting nowhere. They were reviewing the same old pieces of paper, and they were getting nowhere. They needed to have an investigative effort.
Then the FBI, which has the authority to work domestically against U.S. citizens, then they took up the case And that's when they finally caught him.
And then it let the FBI into the CIA, and they had this mess with counterintelligence where everybody's under suspicion.
There's no question that the relationship between CIA and the FBI was terrible, very hostile.
They took the Ames case, the Russian mole, and said, well, there's hundreds of moles out in the CIA, let us go after them. And they were let loose inside the CIA.
The agency suffered, and it suffered very bad, much damage. It was very serious damage.
I think that the arrest of Ames was the end of the CIA in a sense, the CIA I knew.
At a time when people said, you know, who needs the CIA? This is 1994, the Cold War is over. Nobody had ever heard of bin Laden.
In 1995 wijst het onderzoek van de aanslag op het World Trade Center naar het Al-Qaeda-netwerk en naar Osama bin Laden. Het persoonlijk vermogen van deze man, die de financier van de Heilige Oorlog wordt genoemd, wordt geschat op $2 miljard. De Washington Post beschrijft de uiterst nauwe banden tussen bin Laden en de Saoedische koninklijke familie en vertelt hoe hij tijdens de oorlog in Afghanistan gerekruteerd, getraind en bewapend werd door de CIA. Bin Laden werd ook ondersteund door Saoedi-Arabië, dat hem in staat stelde zijn ambities te verwezenlijken.
America was literally, for many years, completely unaware that the Saudi Arabian royal family was funding terrorism as a price for internal stability.
But by the time Clinton left office, he knew darn well that money was going from the royal family to bin Laden. They'd seen the evidence.
Both parties, the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party, decided to tolerate this state-funded terrorism because the Saudis had the oil.
That's why we don't look into it. That's why we don't spy on it. That's why we don't challenge Saudi Arabia on human rights. I mean, they still stone people for adultery. Do you hear a word here?
What we have unleashed with this policy of supporting an extremely repressive regime and giving them the money to keep this, basically sucking the lifeblood out of Saudi Arabia, is we have fed the Islamic Revolution.
And I think that is a geostrategic mistake of the first order. We allowed ourselves to become unethical and stupid over oil.
Because if you take Saudi Arabia and you cause a revolution and its oil is taken off 25%, the price of oil will hit $150 a barrel and this country will collapse.
We act timid and with fear around that royal family because we're afraid they'll cut off the oil.
De Amerikaanse politieke leiders en een hele reeks presidenten knijpen een oogje dicht voor het olierijke vorstendom dat de Koran naar de letter naleeft, maar wel de VS de gemaakte kosten voor de Golfoorlog vergoedde. $55 miljard. Machtige Amerikaanse oliemaatschappijen strijden om de koninklijke gunsten en een aandeel in de buit van $150 miljard per jaar. In de raad van commissarissen van de Saoedische Aramco Company zitten enkele Amerikanen.
And a lot of the people who ran U.S. foreign policy are reliant on the royal family for money.
You know, you just assume to be allied with American petroleum companies. If you're, you know, whether you take money from them directly or have their stock, you cannot challenge Exxon's position today in Saudi Arabia, for instance.
They are buying the politicians and feeding the politicians information that allows decisions to be made in the favor of the corporations that are looting the country.
Diplomats, when they leave the service, retire and go work for Saudi Arabia or for another Gulf country.
And if their future after office is to be in the oil industry, then they should be disqualified for a post in the Middle East, in my view.
The word in town is if you're nice to Saudi Arabia, you're a senior politician, you can fly to Riyadh and get $1 million for a speech.
When Bill Clinton says something nice about Saudi Arabia, you have to understand he gets paid to go make speeches there.
That's the way it works. People from the White House go work for Saudi banks. They become consultants.
The influence of corporate money, oil money, on American foreign policy is enormous. That is at the heart of all of this.
The petroleum lobby is the important thing, is you've got to understand is much more important than the CIA. you know, it's a hierarchy in Washington. And if the petroleum lobby's here, the CIA's down here. And you maybe have State Department, and then you've got the lobbying firms, and you've got the consultants, and then you've got the petroleum, and then the White House and Congress.
Bij toeval ontdekt Robert Baer hoe de olielobby Bill Clinton helpt zijn herverkiezingscampagne te financieren. Baer loopt Roger Tamraz tegen het lijf, directeur van verscheidene oliefirma's. Hij is uitgenodigd voor een barbecue bij de president. Dat heeft hem maar $300.000 gekost, die rechtstreeks in de kas van de Democratische Partij verdwijnen.
I watched this Lebanese man put money in, and Don Fowler offered him a list of services. Tête-à-tête with the president, a night in the Lincoln bedroom, a ride on Air Force One, tea with the president, cufflinks, anything was for sale. There was a price list, you know, you'd go to a catalog. I thought he was lying.
He realized very quickly in his first term that he had to listen to oil and he had to listen to Wall Street.
The only thing I blame myself for is the stupidity, my stupidity, of not knowing the way the system works. Because what happened was, as I was sending in reports about campaign financing, the CIA doesn't spy on Americans, let alone spy on the President of the United States. I was passing information about the President of the United States to the director. And they were just horrified. Look, I was hired by the CIA to tell the truth, and I wasn't going to stop then. I don't give a damn about the politics. That was the truth. I had really crossed the Rubicon River when I started writing reports about the President of the United States. It's not done in the CIA. I did this consciously. I went to Congress and told them what had happened, not knowing the way Congress worked, but I had to tell somebody. And I told a friend in Congress, who, by the way, has since was found dead in a motel room with a shotgun, his head blown off. That's another story for another time.
Bob Baer besluit een getuigenverklaring af te leggen voor het congres, waarin hij de invloed en de rol van lobby's beschrijft in de politiek en de presidentsverkiezingen en de onorthodoxe werkwijze van Clintons entourage.
The day I went to the grand jury to testify on campaign financing, my apartment was broken into. Nothing was taken. And the grand jury was thoroughly... They didn't even raise campaign financing in the grand jury. Not at all. Wasn't a word. And every time I tried to say something about the way the system worked, the U.S. attorney just cut me off and threatened me with contempt. She called a recess, she called me out, she says, one more time you bring up campaign financing before the grand jury, and this court's going to hold you in contempt or we're going to send you to jail. And the system's crazy. It was dementia. Once they saw they couldn't shut me up, what they did was turn the investigation on me. It was pure intimidation of a police state. This is inside the CIA. And then the medical office came back and said, he needs a psychiatric exam. And so I said, you know, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to take it psych. I knew it was becoming Stalin-esque, because then what they do is they give you a psychiatric exam, a controlled psychiatrist. They can do anything with you. They can put you in St. Elizabeth's. That's a mental hospital in Washington. They could fire you. They could send you home, anything. I said, forget it. Once the politics had set in, because I knew I had done nothing wrong, I was understanding how the system really worked if you're off message. And I knew at that point it was time to leave.
Bob Baer neemt ontslag en krijgt een prestigieuze medaille uitgereikt voor zijn voorbeeldige CIA-carrière.
If it were legally permissible, the CIA would blow up my house with me in it.
De CIA heeft Bin Laden gelokaliseerd in Soedan, maar Clinton is druk met zijn verkiezingscampagne. Wel geeft hij in februari 1996 in het diepste geheim de CIA toestemming al het nodige te doen om Bin Laden onschadelijk te maken.
Believe me, if we could assassinate Osama bin Laden, we would. Clinton gave the order. Kill him. They couldn't find him. Clinton wanted Osama bin Laden dead. They couldn't find him. The agency could not find him.
Onder druk van Amerika besluit de regering in Khartoum een maand later Bin Laden en zijn geheime leger terug te sturen naar Saoedi-Arabië. Maar de koninklijke familie daar wil hem niet hebben. Daarop wenden de Soedanezen zich tot Bill Clinton.
The United States and the Saudi government went to the Sudanese and said, Bin Laden is a problem. And the Sudanese were eager to improve their relations both with Saudi Arabia and with the United States. And they said, okay, what do you want? Do you want him? And the Saudis said, we don't want him. They didn't want Bin Laden to come back home. They wanted him just to disappear.
The Sudanese offered to turn Bin Laden over to Saudi Arabia in order to jail him. They had to give it from one Muslim country to another. In other words, he would have been in jail in 1996, February. The Sudanese were desperately trying to surrender to the United States.
Then the Sudanese said, we'll give him to you. And the Sudanese said, no. Or the American side said, no, we can't indict him. We have no crime that we can charge him with, so we can't take him. And that's a fact.
You had to have charges, you had to have either an indictment or a complaint or an arrest warrant. And as I recall, in '96, we were not there on the evidence to bring him back to the United States to prosecute him.
And the United States put no pressure on Saudi Arabia to accept him. I know exactly when the meetings occurred. And they said, if it's going to cause you problems taking Bin Laden, we don't care. I'm quite aware of the correspondence on that.
And then so the Sudanese kicked him out and he went to Afghanistan, and we know the rest of the story.
De Amerikaanse regering besluit de capaciteit voor contra-terrorisme te versterken en te reactiveren. Units van de FBI en de CIA, de twee aardsvijanden, worden samengevoegd in één inlichtingendienst. Dale Watson, hoofd van de afdeling terrorismebestrijding van de FBI, krijgt het verzoek om voor de CIA te gaan werken.
When I said, what was the job? He said, we need somebody to go out and work with the CIA. And I said, well, for your information, I don't know those people, I don't like those people, and I don't want to go out there. And he basically said, well, you are going out there. And I was forced, basically, as we later laugh about it, it was a hostage exchange program where people from the FBI were forced out of the CIA. And at the same time that conversation happened with me, there were two individuals in the CIA who were called in and basically told, one of you two guys are going over to the FBI. And they responded, I know this is true. They responded, we don't like those people, we don't know those people, we don't want to go over there.
Because FBI stinks at counterintelligence.
Its most important mission was to destroy the CIA.
They talk about the paramilitary case officers in CIA as knuckle draggers, like they're baboons or something, you know?
So that's how it initially started, the cooperation between the CIA and FBI in counterterrorism.
In augustus 1998 worden er aanslagen gepleegd op de Amerikaanse ambassades in Tanzania en Kenia. Er vallen 224 slachtoffers, waaronder 12 Amerikanen. Bin Laden wordt staatsvijand nummer 1 en er wordt een prijs op zijn hoofd gezet. Ondanks een budget van miljarden dollars heeft de CIA geen van beide aanslagen zien aankomen. Een derde aanslag komt zo mogelijk nog onverwachter. Bij een zelfmoordaanslag op de USS Cole in de haven van Aden komen 17 bemanningsleden om en vallen er 26 gewonden.
The Clinton administration chose to accept that as minor attacks that did not require a major response.
Those are things out there. They go on, that's overseas. That's not right here in this country.
So there was a policy failure which said, it's okay to kill Americans, just don't kill too many of them and do it overseas.
History will reveal the failure of the Clinton administration to really get down to dealing with the problem of terrorism, of counterterrorism.
Tegen alle verwachtingen in wint George W. Bush, de gouverneur van Texas, in november 2000 de race naar het Witte Huis. Al is het op het nippertje. 8 jaar nadat zijn vader is afgetreden, wordt George Jr. president. Zijn mededinger, vicepresident Al Gore, legt zich neer bij de stemuitslag om het Amerikaanse kiesstelsel niet in diskrediet te brengen.
He washes out the complexity and the nuances, and I think convinces many people here, but also many people abroad, that he is not very well informed.
I don't think he has the experience in foreign policy to do this on his own, or the intellect to do it on his own.
His inexperience, and I would say lack of seriousness about the complexity of foreign policy. He has a tendency to simplify things.
When you have a president that is a C+ student and doesn't know very much about the world, you have a prescription for disaster.
And I want to thank my dad, the most decent man I have ever known. All my life, I have been amazed that a gentle soul could be so strong. Dad, I am proud to be your son.
In 1960 had George Bush senior een oliemaatschappij opgericht en hij wist de rechten te verwerven om naar olie te zoeken in Kuwait. Bush werd er schatrijk mee. Zijn zoon volgde zijn voorbeeld en richtte in 1979 zijn eigen maatschappij op. Maar dat bedrijf werd zo slecht geleid dat het uit de brand moest worden geholpen door Salim bin Laden, de halfbroer van Osama. Die nam een groot aandelenpakket over tegen een hoge prijs. De familie bin Laden was al eigenaar van Houston Airport in Texas. Voordat hij gouverneur van Texas werd, werkte George Bush Jr. als consultant bij de Harken Energy Group, dat voor 25% eigendom was van de Saoedi's. Advocaat van het bedrijf was James Baker, minister van Buitenlandse Zaken onder de eerste president Bush.
Look, I mean, George Bush, the older George Bush, the first president, made it clear that it was our strategic interests that caused us to go to war against Saddam. Well, what does that mean? The only strategic interest we have in the Gulf is oil.
Secretary Baker said, it's a very simple question. It's spelt in 3 letters, O-I-L.
George Jr. maakte fortuin door zijn bedrijf voor $1 miljard van de hand te doen. 2 maanden later viel Irak Kuwait binnen. Een onderzoek naar de mogelijkheid dat George senior informatie had laten uitlekken leverde wegens gebrek aan bewijs niets op.
We have the President of the United States, his father the President of the United States, and the Vice President of the United States, who've all done enormous business and become very wealthy in the oil business because of the relations with the royal family.
And the people don't realize that the government that they're trusting to control crime is in fact in bed with the criminals.
I can assure you there'd be no negotiations with the Taliban if Unical and Enron didn't want negotiations with the Taliban and had not been major contributors to the Bush campaign.
The way this administration is, I prefer the Clinton administration. I mean, these people are crazy.
The Bush family has substantial relations with criminals. I believe Dick Cheney has substantial relations with criminals. Okay? There is a mafia connection.
In 1989 wordt George Bush Jr. directielid bij de Carlyle Group. Dat blijft hij tot 1994, zonder zijn salaris op te geven aan de belastingen. Het gigantische bedrijf richt zich vooral op de defensieindustrie. Bedrijfskapitaal $16 miljard. Bush senior is nog steeds een van de sleutelfiguren binnen het bedrijf. De Raad van Commissarissen bestaat uit belangrijke mannen die grote invloed uitoefenen op de beleidsmakers. Voorzitter van de Carlyle Group is Frank Carlucci, voormalig onderdirecteur van de CIA en minister van Defensie onder Reagan. Kort na zijn ambtsaanvaarding tekent George W. Bush een contract met de Carlyle Group voor een nieuw artilleriesysteem. Hij negeert een unaniem advies van deskundigen van het Pentagon, die het systeem ongeschikt vinden.
The Carlyle Group probably has direct informal access to anything that CIA knows about the rest of the world.
No accountability, no shareholders. It is a great intelligence front. Now, I mean, Carlucci, when you meet Carlucci, you are at the center of American power.
Carlucci can call anyone in the CIA he wants to and have them talk to him.
His wife, his former wife, Marcia, his ex-wife, used to work at an accounting firm. Her job at the accounting firm was to hide the CIA covert budget in the Defense Department budget. It was all in the family.
Nobody, there are a lot of accusations that we're the, quote, political firm, but nobody can point to any political process in which we've been involved or any time that we've used political influence. We do not try to exercise political influence. We buy and sell companies and we make our money doing that.
They do the covert operations. They funnel and launder the money through the Carlyle Group. George Bush is a business partner. Colin Powell was a partner in Carlyle.
Jim Baker, John Major, Arthur Levitt, there are public figures, but they're all, these people all have business skills, and we're involved in business.
And I think it would be interesting for the public to take a close look at where their money comes from.
The Carlyle Group, of course, has a lot of interests in Saudi Arabia. Bin Laden family, for instance, was thought to have invested in Carlyle businesses in London, so they were very strong ties. They were clearly a driving force in the very special relation that grew up between Saudi Arabia and the U.S., and with the Bush family in particular.
Well, that was a very small investment. I think it was $1 million or $2 million, and we bought it back. We were not, obviously, we were not dealing with Osama bin Laden.
Meteen na zijn aantreden ontvangt George W. Bush een duidelijke waarschuwing van de CIA... Bin Laden uit openlijke bedreigingen richting VS. In maart 2001 publiceert een staatscommissie een rapport waarin staat... Een rechtstreekse aanslag op Amerika is zeer waarschijnlijk. Ons land beschikt niet over een adequate structuur om die dreiging het hoofd te bieden.
There were a number of us who had been saying since the mid-1990s that terrorists were almost certainly going to use some kind of a weapon of mass destruction inside the United States, and that we should be preparing for that. There were a number of panels and commissions and so on that said a catastrophic terrorist attack was coming. It was virtually inevitable.
The CIA was screaming, we are going to have an attack on the United States.
There was a huge amount of information coming in about terrorist threats, terrorist plans, something's going to happen, something big is going to happen.
After all, there were to be other attacks in New York in 1993 in addition to the World Trade Center. The plot to bring down 12 airliners in 1995. The plot to crash a plane into CIA's headquarters about the same time. The planned attack on Los Angeles Airport on the eve of the year 2000.
There was a plot years ago to attack CIA, to attack the facility at Langley. And of course, periodically, there are threats against the White House and Capitol Hill. Somebody will drive a car up and, threaten to do something.
We were quite convinced that America would be attacked, and we knew the gravity of the situation.
And unfortunately, while the politicians all shook their heads, wisely, in agreement, no one did anything.
The whole country was essentially asleep.
Ondanks de toenemende dreiging duurt de machtsstrijd tussen CIA en FBI voort. Het hoofd van de FBI waarschuwt zijn mensen geen informatie te delen met de CIA.
It appears there were some mistakes made. Lack of exchange of information between agencies and such forth.
It was not a question of keeping secrets. It was a question of not having the facility to send information to CIA.
They don't communicate very well. Their computers don't talk to each other. Their people don't train together. Their people don't work together.
Each side, when it has information, tends to kind of keep it to itself. And they don't quite trust each other.
It's not a question of fighting. It's having different agencies with different missions and different cultures.
There was a war, but largely carried out in the counterintelligence area.
In februari 2001 waarschuwt Israël de CIA. Terroristen willen 1 of meer passagiersvliegtuigen kapen en als wapens gebruiken. Koning Abdallah van Jordanië, de Egyptische president Mubarak en bondskanselier Schröder waarschuwen het Pentagon ook. Er komt binnenkort een aanval op Amerika met behulp van passagiersvliegtuigen.
For a number of years, Islamic extremists have been trained in how to hijack a passenger aircraft, an old one on the ground there that you can see with commercial satellite photography. And they're trained in groups of 4 and 5 how to hijack such an aircraft with, among other things, very short knives.
I sent an email to the CIA in 1998 on Khalid Sheikh Mohammed about hijackings and the aliases he was using. He was traveling around Europe. I never got a response.
Some people from Arab countries were studying flight training, and they were not interested in learning how to land. There were things like that that clearly called for more investigation.
Can you imagine instructing a guy who's supposed to go off to learn how to be in an airplane, and that he tells his pilot instructor, I'm only trying to turn left and right? I mean, come on.
We received a number of leads that we literally did not take seriously. A young man walked into the FBI office in Newark, New Jersey, a year prior to 9/11, and told the FBI that there was a plan to use planes to fly into the World Trade Center. The FBI could not verify any aspect of this story, and so rather than taking it seriously and understanding there was a great deal they did not know, as well as a great deal that the CIA was not telling them, the FBI dismissed the story.
They probably thought that these hijackers were planning a simple, old-fashioned hijack of the plane where you make demands. They probably did not know for sure that they planned to use the airplane as a bomb, as a missile. So they waited and waited, and then it was too late.
It's just like the information on Zakaria Moussaoui.
On the 24th of August, DST, French intelligence, gave the legal attaché for the FBI in Paris a document showing that Moussaoui was involved with Al-Qaeda.
We had given them fairly specific information, especially about the fact that Moussaoui had trained in Afghanistan in a camp run by bin Laden. We also knew he had been in contact with Al-Qaeda agents in Europe, and we had given their names to the U.S. authorities.
Do you know that document never got to the FBI agents in Minneapolis where Moussaoui was operating? Not only were they keeping the stuff from Minneapolis going to the top of the top of the FBI was keeping it from getting down to them.
The man in charge of the office in Minneapolis is like a prince, a little king, a baron. And he only sends to headquarters in Washington what he wants to send.
The FBI decided that the information passed on by the French about Moussaoui was insufficient and didn't deserve further investigation or setting up wiretaps.
The French gave it to the United States. The Americans said, that's not important. They didn't put taps on his phone. They didn't get into his computer. They don't listen.
You know, everybody says, oh, it's the FBI's fault, it's the CIA's fault. Well, when the president's team is telling you, don't look over there for trouble. We don't want to know if there's trouble over there. We don't want to see it. We don't want to hear it. The Saudis are our friends. What are the intelligence people supposed to do?
The real intelligence failure was that CIA was not conducting operations in Saudi Arabia.
It was understood that the Saudis were our friends and that we were not to spy on our friends.
The king is sending a message. He doesn't want to know. In this case, the king was George W. Bush, or the assistant king, Dick Cheney. But the reality is they did not let our intelligence forces do their job.
Maybe, just maybe, if we had let the organization do its business properly, it might have stopped September 11th.
5 jaar nadat hij de CIA verliet, reist Robert Baer naar de Perzische Golf. Hij wil weer contact opnemen met de groepen die hij infiltreerde en informatie verzamelen over de op handen zijnde aanval.
I became very close to a dissident group in the Gulf that was aware of these plans. So when I resigned from the CIA, did not retire, I went to Beirut. And simply being on the ground, these people told me that Khalid Sheikh Mohammed was planning hijackings. It was the old Ramzi Youssef group that blew up the World Trade Center.
It was telling the president in August of 2001, we're going to have a terrorist incident inside the United States.
I knew the CIA wasn't going to listen because they had decided nothing was going to happen. And this is the way it works. If they decide nothing's going to happen in the bureaucracy, then they don't want to hear any views outside.
We failed to thoroughly examine all of those documents and to understand that they would keep coming back, only their plans would get bigger.
So whether it was the FBI's fault or the CIA's fault, regardless of how you want to put blame, it wasn't done well in that center.
You know, putting money into incompetence is like adding gasoline to a fire. That's what happened.
But we couldn't imagine that they would have that much capability and that many people willing to commit suicide and set up a structure like that.
We missed it entirely.
Op 11 september 2001 is George W. Bush in Florida, waar hij de dag begint met een eindje joggen. Hij heeft net 5 weken vakantie op zijn ranch in Texas achter de rug. Zijn broer, de gouverneur van Florida, heeft hem gevraagd het startschot te geven voor een nieuwe onderwijscampagne in zijn staat. De president maakt grapjes met journalisten. Een uur later gaat hij op bezoek bij een school in Sarasota. Om 8:47 staat de president te lachen met een paar kinderen. Dan wordt zijn adviseur gebeld.